This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay, speaking of the patrons, we have one who has been joining us for many a year. Previously, he's brought to us such bands as Collective Soul, Dig, The Verve Pipe, Violatine, Nada Surf,
Nada.
And then was Local H your pick or Steve's pick?
That was Steve's, but he wanted me to be on it with him.
You were on with him.
Yeah.
That's right. Welcome back, Dewey Cole. Those were all of your picks. Very representative of I like that it's you started out with Violatine. We're like, oh, what's this? Because that was kind of an obscure Australian record that not a lot of people know, but we cut a nice swath through the alternative sound of the United States with these last 4 picks or 5 picks with Local H. So, is it time for another obscure Australian album, or what are you throwing at us this time? Why don't you share your album pick?
So these guys are not from Australia, at least not that I know of, anyway. When I was about 15, my buddy played me the Motley Crue 1994 album, which I know you guys covered probably 5 or 6 years ago. I want to say
might be more than that.
Yeah,
it may have been like 7 years ago. It was a long. I remember you did it because I was excited to see that you did it.
It's only on cassette, that show.
Yeah, that's how old it is. But I fell in love with that when I was like 15. That was my introduction. You're going to think this is crazy, but that was kind of my introduction to Motley Crue, was that tape, because my buddy had it in his cassette player. He had a 66 Chevelle, and he had this cassette deck that was called the Sunk Young, some really shitty quality cassette deck in his car. And the only cassette in this thing was Motley 94. And we listened to that every day for like 2 years. I mean, that's all we listened to. We just loved that album to death. So when John left Motley Crue in 1996, when Vince came back, we were kind of like, well, what's John going to do? So we kind of followed John to his next project, and that was Union, which is what we're talking about today.
Yes.
So that's how I got into Union initially, and what we're going to discuss.
How much hearing damage that would you say it was a Chevelle?
It was a 66 Chevelle, but he when he bought it when he was in high school, and it had one of those aftermarket cassette decks that was because it obviously didn't come. It just had an AM radio.
I'm imagining that was like probably like amped up a little bit.
It wasn't the best sound quality.
It was always played at 11.
Yeah,
and your young years were probably brutalized like mine were.
Yeah, he sold that
with bad sound systems and classic muscle cars.
He kept that car all the way till about a year and a half ago, and he sold it with that same cassette deck still in there.
Was the cassette in there?
Yeah, he still had the cassette too. Still had it.
Awesome.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, we went to a Smashing Pumpkins show on the Melancholy tour, and they handed out these stickers when we walked in the door that said Melancholy Infinite Sadness Tour 1997. It was in Toledo at Savage Hall. And we got that sticker when we walked in the door, and he put it inside his glove box where his cassettes were. That sticker was still there when he sold it. I'm like, that's part of our childhood, man.
Right.
It was the Melancholy tour. That was one of the greatest shows ever.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Jay, were you familiar with Union?
I was. So this came out. So I'm a fan of the 94 Crue album. I, like Dewey, was curious on what he was going to do after. There was a kind of a good, what are we talking, like 3-year span there, where they were rumored to be working on a second album with him, and then things kind of fell apart. And then I remember he started this project, and I'm also a big Kiss fan, so I was always following what Kiss was doing and their soap opera. The The weird thing is I didn't. It also hit at a time where I was really like just into new things. Like I was looking for new music. I was kind of like losing a little bit of interest in some of these artists. By the second half of the 90s, I just never got around to getting it. So hadn't really heard it. I mean, I kind of knew what to expect, knowing Bruce Kulick pretty well and knowing John Corabi from the Motley Crue and even the Scream album, but had never listened to it, oddly enough.
Did you ever hear Old Man Wise, the single?
No.
Oh, wow.
I mean, if I did, I don't remember, you know.
Right. I was not familiar with this at all. I knew it existed because I had seen that name, but I had never listened to it, and I wasn't really sure who was involved. So let me ask you guys, before we get started, what version of this album did you listen to? Because the original version is 11 songs, I believe. And now the streaming version on Spotify has 12 songs. But there's also another version which has 13 songs.
Oh boy. I have the 12-song version that ends with the Beatles cover.
Okay.
Oh, shit. I only have the 11. I just have the original CD from 1998, so I have 11 songs.
Okay. So have you actually heard that Beatles cover?
No, but it's funny that you bring this up because this just came in the mail this week.
The vinyl reissue?
Yeah, probably can't see it with my background, but it's the vinyl reissue that just came this week, and it's got Oh Darling, Walking in Your Sleep, For You, and then Love I Don't Need It Anymore acoustic. So I will listen to the bonus tracks eventually. It literally just came yesterday.
Well, then we should probably leave the Beatles cover off, Jay, from our discussion, because it wasn't a part of the original album and Dewey didn't listen to it.
Got it.
I'm sure it's great. I've heard John do it solo acoustic, and he always does a great job, but I've never heard the actual studio version.
We will wipe it from our minds.
Doesn't exist.
What Beatles song?
Who are the Beatles?
Never heard
Not
of them.
familiar.
Nope. So a little history on this band.
History of the band.
As mentioned, they formed because of Mr. Bruce Kulick of Kiss and John Corabi, formerly of Motley Crue at that point, got together with a couple of studio guys, James Hunting, who had played with David Lee Roth and Eddie Money, and him on bass, and then drummer Brent Fitz, who had played with Slash. I don't know if he played with Slash before or after this, but that's his other.
I think he plays with Slash now too.
Oh, he does? Okay.
Yes.
He's played with other people. He's played with like
Vince
Miles
Neil,
Kennedy.
Gene Simmons. Yep.
Yeah.
Guess who?
Who?
Alice Cooper for a long time.
Who?
It seems like we have an owl in the podcast.
Do you mean the Guess Who? The band, the Guess Who?
Oh, the band, the Guess Who. You thought you said Guess Who. So this was released February 24th, 1998 on Mayhem Records, which I am not familiar with. It was produced by Kurt Cuomo and followed up in 2000 by the album The Blue Room, which was released on Spitfire Records, and that was produced by Bob Marlett. So, what did our patrons think about this record? We'll get to the poll in a minute, but we had some comments. Scott Witt said, "This is such a great album. Corabi and Kulick were great together. Any chance it had was done in by being on a tiny label. I think I Don't Love You Anymore could easily be a hit country song today."
Definitely.
Cal Bittner said, "This was a surprising listen. I've never heard it before, but I love the hard rock edge mixed with early 90s Seattle sound. It reminded me of War Babies, one of my favorite 90s hard rock albums. Also, is it just me or does the opening guitar of Pain Behind Your Eyes sound similar to the guitar tone of Collective Soul's December?" Darren Lehman said, "What? Yes,
Not
Jay?
just the tone, it's the it's the notes too.
The notes, the tone.
Yeah.
Darren Lehman said, I liked that album. I liked that the album was straight up, no frills, rock and roll. I was surprised to read who was in the band, to read who the band consisted of, and even more pleasantly surprised to hear that the record doesn't sound overproduced. It was a nice listen, but nothing really grabbed me by the eardrums and made me think, wow, so I'd rank it as a solid EP. Bill Davidson said, sounds like very competent hard rock to me. Not my cup of tea, but not bad at all. Unfortunately, probably ended up in a lot of record store cutout bins. Funny, though, how many of my favorite albums ended up there, too. And Richard Waterman said, Billy Boy, this is exactly my cup of tea. I don't know why he said it with a southern accent, but love Corabi's other band, The Scream. People should check that band out, too. I'm with Kyle when he says he loves the hard rock edge mixed with the 90s grunge and mid-90s post-grunge. Pain Behind the Eyes and Let It Flow are my favorite tracks. Guitar does sound like December at the start. This kind of sound on a rock album is ideal for me, raw but with a bit of polish, and it's meaty, full, and honest sounding. The second album, The Blue Room, is really good too. Worthy album. All right, let's get into it, Jay. Tell me one thing you liked about Union by Union.
Not to split hairs, but this album probably didn't get enough distribution to even hit the cutout bins.
Right,
that's
exactly.
That's true. I had to specially order it from my local record store when it came out.
So yeah, I mean, it's a cool mix of classic, tough, hard rock, but obviously they're taking influence, just like Motley Crue did in '94, from what's going on around them. So you're hearing this interesting, like, clash, or not clash, but combination of the big riffs, anthemic chords, hooks, gruff classic rock vocal, but with like tuned down guitars parts, even tones. And I think the drumming is also very 90s at times. It's really good. It reminds me a lot of Eric Singer, but it has that, some of the beats have some of that the early Pearl Jam kind of feel, that the first couple records, especially in choruses and stuff, like it, I don't know how to explain it. There's like almost like not a gallop, but kind of a particular kind of feel to some of the chorus and stuff. But it's super competent, drumming, really cool fills. It's punchy. So it's a good, straightforward, for the most part, hard rock record that has some 90s feel. I think what's most interesting, though, is when they really, kind of merge those together around a really compelling hook. So I think songs like Around Again, Get Off My Cloud, Love, I Don't Need It Anymore, Tangerine, like really strong melodically. And then, musically, there's this cool hybrid going on between kind of 70s and 90s and a little bit of 80s in there too, in terms of maybe the vocal more. The guitar playing, I think, is what probably brings a lot of people to the record. Some of the solos are really probably some of Bruce Kulick's best solos. I'm thinking of Around Again as a good example. This Eastern feel almost, but the tone is this searing, like effect overdriven tone that it almost sounds like it's burning right through the amp. Like it just sounds so loud and overdriven. It's a really cool solo and just tone. And obviously the vocals, if you have heard the 94 Crew record, you know what John Corabi sounds like. You know, he's pretty much doing that here, maybe a little bit more melodic. Love to hear him sing. He's got a absolutely original voice. Like when you hear him, it's no doubt it's him. I think the last thing I'll say though is like, while all those I think all those things are what bring you to the record. I think what makes it work when it does is actually the bass and drums. Like really tight, cool parts, heavy grooves. The bass tone is at times really interesting, like kind of gritty and, you know, playing a little bit, a lot of movement, playing some really cool parts that lock up with the drums, and then that one of the rhythm guitars. So I think it's a really solid, you know, rock sound, and then kind of got the Corabi thing going on vocally, but this cool duality between grungy 90s and at times almost like power pop 70s choruses and sounds. You know, they even do some like Beatles-esque harmonies in here that come in a couple tunes. So just a lot of cool styles thrown together, held together by, you know, really good musicians. What do you think, Tim?
There's a lot I like about this record. I was trying to place it because, you know, it's 98. What is it? 98 when this comes out. And some of the guitar playing, you hear, you know, Alice in Chains. It's got that, whatever it is that a lot of bands picked out in Jerry Cantrell's playing. That's present here, but it's not like in the way that like Godsmack or all those bands turned it into these dirges and these like overly heavy riffs. They just incorporate it so that, you know, a lot of these are not far off from like the Motley Crue album that we reviewed, in terms of sound and in terms of riffs and stuff like that. What I think caught me off guard is I don't know Bruce Kulick that well as a guitar player. Like 80s Kiss is not my forte. So
Blasphemy.
I know. I'm sorry that I don't have rise to it.
You don't know what you're missing
on regular rotation. Anyway,
you have to be the biggest Kiss nerd ever to spend any time with 80s Kiss.
Right.
I forgive you.
So listening to this, you mentioned, I think, Let It Flow earlier. There's parts in that song where I was like, this sounds like Big Wreck. Like there's these interesting riffs and choices and voicings. When they hit like the 4.5 minute mark of that song and it goes into this real heavy driving riff, I'm like, that sounds like the Oath. Like it's not the same exact jangle but it's got that Eastern kind of scale that he uses sometimes. So I found it interesting from that perspective, is because you think of Kiss in the 80s. I'm thinking of, you know, insane acrobatic, you know, glam metal guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm listening to this and I'm going, well, this is more like Jerry Cantrell and Ian Thornley than any of that. And then I started to hear some Jimmy Page-ish stuff. There were some things that reminded me of like Zeppelin-esque riffs. I don't think I fully appreciated Corabi as well as maybe I should have when we reviewed the Motley Crue record. I think I've maybe come to appreciate him more as a vocalist over time. So I think their pairing works really well here, because Corabi's interesting. He has a distinct voice, but I don't know that I could ever pick it out. You know what I mean? Like when I hear him, I'm like, oh, I know who that is. Like I can tell this is John Corabi. But if you were to play this like in a bar, I don't know that I would go, oh, this is that John Corabi band Union. Like it kind of works as kind of nondescript, but then he can really do some interesting things as a vocalist. You mentioned about the harmonies and whatnot. I think everybody on this, everybody who plays sings on this. And there are some really great harmonies that are not really expected from a band made up of these members.
October Morning Wind.
Yeah.
Cold October morning wind, the seasons come and they wither like a dying rose. My pain is measured by a sky that's old and gray. A misty morning, I awake to find it's much too late. Pieces of time they keep falling down on me, and it won't be long. I can hear your song, October morning wind. I keep holding on till you come back again. Sun is hiding once.
So there was a lot that was liked, but I'm like you, Jay. There was no way I would have heard this in 1998. A, it's on a small label, and B, I was on the complete opposite end of my music spectrum at this point. I'm like listening to, weird electronic music and action rock from Sweden that you're feeding me, and Manic Street Preacher, like second wave Britpop, and so I wasn't listening to any like anything hard rock connected except for maybe like Buck Cherry.
I did have the first Buck Cherry album. I really liked it too.
Oh yeah,
The
when they
first one's
came out,
good.
it was a. I remember that being a jolt. It was like, whoa, okay, we're back. We're back to the rock stuff. I mean, I would have been open to this at the time. I mean, I was interested in it. I just priority wise, like, had just graduated college or was in college, and you're like, there's only so much music I can buy right now. So,
And this wasn't at Best Buy, I'm guessing. Like
Right.
this isn't going to be one of those cheap sales on the end cap at Best Buy.
Right.
You're going to have to go search this out. You're probably going to have to be reading. I don't know.
Metal
Was like
Edge.
Metal
It
Edge
was-
around still in 98, or had it moved online yet? Was there a bad
wasn't metal
ASCII
sledge.
art Metal Edge magazine?
The buzz about this was in '97 because I used to get Metal Edge all the time. That
Yeah,
was
I
because
did
that was pre-internet. So if you wanted to find out about metal bands, rock bands, classic rock, you'd have to read Metal Edge, Circus, Hit Parader. But I always had Metal Edge because it was always the best to me. And they would always have stuff about Union. So I knew it was coming from the summer of '97. I think it came out early '98. So there was already articles on it, interviews, kind of prepping the record, and then I had to actually special order it through a record company or a record store called Allied Records in Toledo. They specially ordered it for me and my friend. But yeah, it wasn't something that you would see in an end cap at Best Buy. I don't think I ever saw it at Best Buy.
Yeah.
What works for you, Dewey? What draws you into this record?
Well, before I get into that, I wanted to say a lot of people don't know this. Some people do, but some don't. And I'm not sure if this is true because when Nikki Sixx talks, he sometimes just spouts a lot of shit because he likes to hear himself talk so much.
Right.
But he has said in past interviews that he was the one that introduced John to Bruce during the recording of Generation Swine. Because what happened was when they brought Vince back, which was essentially forced by management, the band didn't want to bring Vince back. No matter what the movie The Dirt says, that's complete bullshit. Management wanted to bring Vince back because they wanted the band to make money. So they let John hang around and teach Vince how to sing these songs that he was writing with the band. And Nikki was the one that actually introduced John to Bruce during these sessions. So John and Bruce formed a friendship and then started writing together shortly thereafter. And that's kind of the genesis of Union. That's how it started.
And Bruce was looking for work because he got a similar situation, got the boot from Kiss.
It was 96. Yeah. It was right when Motley was doing Swine and Kiss was doing Reunion. So yeah, so they both kind of found each other because their bands deserted them, which is really sad because they were both great in their respected bands.
Yep.
I think we've talked about Revenge before, how amazing that album is, and Bruce is playing.
Yeah, I think Carnival of Souls is the probably the closest to this one. It's
Yep.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
timeline wise, but also
at the time it was
sonically.
only bootlegged at the time, if you remember, because it
Yeah.
came out years later, if I remember, like 98, 99.
Yeah,
Didn't
with
it come
that
out like
terrible cover with
yeah, like in the studio? But at the time it was only available on like bootleg because it was never released, at least at the era that John and Bruce met each other. But yeah, you're exactly right. This is his guitar is closest to Carnival of Souls on this Union record.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way so people would understand how this kind of started, because that started from leaving Motley and then leaving Kiss and then getting together. I fell in love with the record. The first single, which was called Old Man Wise, actually I did hear it on the radio. My local radio station in Toledo that I think I've mentioned before, you guys remember Buzz 106.5.
Oh yeah.
They would have these, what was it called? It wasn't called a cage match. It was like a buzz brawl, I think is what it was called. It was the Buzz Brawl. And it was like every night that they would do these songs, they would face these songs off. Do you remember that? Do you guys remember
And people
the
would
Buzz
call
Brawl?
in to vote for the song.
Yeah, you can call in and you can vote for like your favorite song of the two. And this is pre-Twitter, so you knew people weren't blowing up the votes on Twitter. It was actually phone calls, you know, because whenever they do those now on the radio, like the Blitz will do it here in Columbus, there's obviously Facebook groups that are going on Twitter and overloading the votes, so these certain bands will win. But back in those days, it was actually people calling and voting for songs. And this was featured when it was first released as a single, which honestly, I don't remember how far in advance of the album it was, probably at least 1 or 2 months. And it actually won a couple nights. And we were really excited. My buddy Joel and I were really excited to hear it because it was the first thing we were hearing from John since Motley 94. And I did love Generation Swine. I know that there's a couple stinkers on there for the most part, but I did love that record. And John had a lot to do with a couple songs like Let Us Pray, which is on that record. And I would have loved to have hear him sing that because he actually wrote the song. So this is the first time that we're actually hearing him do something on his own with the new band. So it was a very exciting time for us to hear it. And I was blown away by the song. It was heavy. It was melodic. It was pretty much everything I expected to hear from him. So from hearing that song, I think we even taped it on the radio, if I remember correctly, because it was on a second night. Really excited, ordered the record. When we got the record, turned it up, played it. I think every song we pretty much loved. I mean, from the first listen, because that's how much I love John Corabi. I love his vocal stylings. I love his playing. Honestly, at the time, I wasn't super familiar with Bruce yet, outside of Kiss Unplugged. Like I remember seeing him on Kiss Unplugged, but I wasn't a huge Kiss fan when I was younger. I kind of got into them in my 20s. So at the time, I was 17 when this record came out. I really didn't know much about Bruce, but I knew I loved the guitar. I loved the solos. I loved the tone. And it's kind of funny because I'll go back to this album years later. I mean, I still come back to it at least once a year. But you guys mentioned Let It Flow. Is it Let It Flow? Yeah, I think it's Let It Flow. That's one song that actually I didn't really love. I wasn't enamored with the song early on, but lately I really love it now. Like, it's kind of funny, this album kind of just, there's certain songs that pop back up years later that I'm like, I forgot how great the song is, or I didn't love the song as much as I used to, but I do now. So yeah, and October Morning Wind, which is the song I wanted to mention, that's one of my all-time favorite Corabi songs. The harmonizing on that is perfect. There's actually an acoustic version that they recorded for the live record that came out the next year. I want to say it was like BBC session or something. It's featured on their live record, Live from the Galaxy. I actually think that live recording is better than the studio version on this album. But their live vocals are just incredible together. There's a couple great videos on YouTube too of that song you can find. But that's one of the highlights of it for me. It kind of reminds me of it's very Zeppelin-y. As you mentioned, there's a lot of 70s stuff combined with 90s, and that song reminds me of a Zeppelin type song from the 70s. I just love the riff that Bruce wrote for it. So that's definitely one of the highlights for me. Did you guys like that song at all?
Yeah, I like the Zeppelin-esque feel of that acoustic. And the harmonies are great. You just don't hear that with bands of this type very often. So yeah, I had that amongst my favorite songs on the record.
Yeah, and that's probably what I love so much about it. It combines the best of 70s arena rock with 90s alt grunge, I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of like combining those two, and it's really the best of both worlds. I mean, it's got stomping choruses. I think it's the song Heavy D. I think it's that song where it's got a kind of a screamy kind of chorus with it. We can kind of scream along to it. Or no, maybe it's Get Off My Cloud I'm thinking of. I think it's Get Off My Cloud.
I have to say, I
think it's that one.
I was confused the first time I looked at the track list. I was looking through the song titles, and I said, okay, Get Off My Cloud, Tangerine, Oh Darling. I was like, wait a minute. Is that a Rolling Stone, a Led Zeppelin, and a Beatles cover all in the back half of this record? And then I realized it was the Stones is Get Off of My Cloud, not Get Off My Cloud. And it's not a cover of Tangerine. But I was real confused for a minute when I was looking at the song titles.
Yeah, but Corabi is such a huge fan of 70s rock that I'm not surprised that sometimes if those things are intentional.
Well, that's what I think warmed me to this record pretty quickly was, yes, there are touches of what you call classic rock, although technically Alice in Chains would be classic rock now too anyways. But of 70s classic rock, and 90s classic rock. That's depressing to say.
I know.
But it's very seamless. There isn't a blatantly, they didn't write a blatantly 70s riff where you're like, oh, that sounds exactly like what Zeppelin would sound like. Or exactly, there's something that sounds like Sea of Sorrow on here.
Yeah.
And so it's just a nice combo of those two things. That I sometimes forget that Corabi also plays guitar, but it's those two guys, playing guitar. And he's not just a guy strumming an acoustic, chords on acoustic. He can actually play.
Yeah, he plays some interesting counter. Some of the parts are simple, but they're cool chord choices against the riffs. All Band Wise is a good example. And I think I'll go back to the drumming again and probably the bass playing in terms of why it doesn't go too far into the 70s. Even when you hear the Zeppelin, you might hear something on guitar where you're like, ooh, that feels like Zeppelin or even Big Rack. But the drums are not doing the Bonham, or a 70s style drum thing. They're doing more of a 90s, I think, approach to drumming. I mean, they're super competent. You could probably play anything, but that's where it never goes too far one way or the other. It's this constant push and pull back and forth because the whole band is sort of, if one person's going with this influence, the other one's trying to pull it back in another direction, which I think keeps it grounded in its own kind of thing. And
I think that's why it works so well, because there's so many great parts of both that it's kind of like an amalgamation of it, where it's, you hear this there, you hear that there, but it works so well together. And these guys, when they did this record, they were older than the 90s bands. I mean, these guys were 10 years older than the majority of the 90s bands at the time. So they were pulling different influences that those bands like Alice in Chains were not pulling from. So, you're going to get different sounds like that.
I do have to disagree with you slightly, and I'll start what didn't work. I think the drums are totally on point, but they're not that creative to me. There are times where I hear fills and parts, and I'm like, that could have been more interesting. Like it sounds like a very good studio drummer that I could not pick out of a lineup. Like,
I hope Brent's not listening to this, or we're going to be in trouble.
No, that's an incredibly difficult skill, because you're right. Like, a lot of times those guys are writing for radio, and to get on radio, you got to be perfect, and you got to come up with something that's serving the song, but also interesting. And I think that it's a completely legit rock record performance. I just, from my listening, preferences, I was just looking for. I didn't need Zach Barocas from Jawbox. I didn't need crazy polyrhythms or anything like that. I just wanted just maybe do a weird thing here and there that I'm not expecting, and that just didn't happen for me.
I hear you on that. It's I think it makes a lot of the right choices for the song.
Mm-hmm.
But I also agree that sometimes with rock music, it's cool to push the boundaries a little bit more. And the drums don't do that. They don't ever say hey, here's a totally different way to approach this. It's going to mess with your head for a minute, that never happens.
Do you think them being a new band and never playing live at the time of the recording may have had something to do with that?
Possibly, but it's also, he's an incredible drummer, but he's a replacement drummer, right? This is what he does. His specialty is to play like other people, whether it be the 100 drummers Alice Cooper's had, or the, all the drummers that Slash has had. He's got to sound like all those people. So that it feels like that's kind of what's going on here. It's kind of a, hey, we want to, I don't know. I have no idea what the conversations were, but it feels like there was an attempt to hey, let's make sure the drums are contemporary and sound modern. And, we want to go for that kind of feel. And then Bruce is going to bring what Bruce does, and we'll make all this work. And it does for this. I think from a songwriting standpoint, I don't have any issues with it at all.
Yeah.
It's more of a performance, light my hair on fire. Where I'm like, oh man, that was badass,
what would this sound like if Tommy Lee played drums?
Yeah.
In the 90s, not very good, but
okay, well,
1994.
Motley 94.
Awesome.
Motley 94 is one of his best drum performances on record.
Right. So what if this was the follow-up and this was the songs and he was playing drums? I think there would have been a slightly bit more inventiveness with Tommy Lee. I wasn't going to stick drummers that would be out. I'm not saying let's get Matt Cameron, but
and I think what you're hitting on too is one of the reasons why I like the 94 record, the Motley Crue 94 record so much is the performances. They are just jamming. They are just playing their asses off. And some of this, from a songwriting standpoint, those are not singles on that record. It's just, they are just writing rock music that they're feeling and just playing their hearts out. And the drums are a big part of that.
And that's why it's so loved so many years later, because it wasn't made for radio. It's one of those records you can go back and it's still fresh. It's great.
Is there anything that doesn't work for you on the record, Jay?
It's really about, I think, for me, Corabi's songwriting. I think he can be really good. He can also be very middle of the road and not super hooky. So I think there's some songs on here where Pain Behind Your Eyes sounds like a 90s Gene Simmons Kiss song.
Another friend has come and left you. It's getting hard to recognize the truth. I know. So every time they lie to you, I'll read between the lines.
kind of does. I do love that song, but I guess it kind of does.
Like I could totally hear them handing him that song.
But I love some Gene Simmons 90s stuff. So, you know.
Let It Flow. Awesome. I like the sound of that, but just it doesn't have the hook. Empty Soul's another example. Robin's song is probably the best example of what I mean, where that, to me, that just sounds like if you asked AI to write the acoustic song on a hard rock album. Like it's so generic sounding. It's just a bunch of sequences of cowboy chords thrown together and him singing over top.
Cowboy chords.
So,
I think that's the only song that John wrote by himself on the record. I think everything else was collaborative, if I remember correctly.
yeah.
And I also wanted to mention, it looks like the producer had co-writes on all the songs too.
Yeah.
Which I didn't really know that until this week when I was looking up.
Same with the second record. I noticed the producer of that record has co-writes. It's a different producer, and he has a co-write on every song.
I wonder how much, the guy's name is Kurt Cuomo. I wonder how much, I know he has connections with Kiss and stuff. I just wonder how much songwriting he was doing. Was he recommending things as a producer, or was he actually coming up with parts? Like that would be a great, I'm really curious, you know, how that was done. Because I would imagine the majority of the structure of the songs came from Bruce and John, but
Yeah.
you know, I don't know.
Just so you guys know, the label that did the reissues is called Deco. You can check them out at decoentertainment.com. You want to know what else they've put out reissues of this year, or I don't know if they're all reissues, but take some guesses.
I went on there to order the reissues for Union, but I didn't look at any of the other stuff. So
Shark Island.
I don't think. Do I know Shark Island? Did you guys cover that record or something?
No,
that's
in the 80s.
I've never even heard of it. Yeah.
Some Donnie V. Some. What else is on here? There's like a lot of Donnie V. Maybe it's Donnie V's label. Then there's like Sepultura and 10 Years After. Like it's such a bizarre like mishmash of things. The Vibrators. Like it's Cannibal Corpse is on here. Like what?
I'm sure these bands all have their audiences still, especially Sepultura. Those guys, I saw them with Pantera back in like 96, and they had a bunch of people that were into them. So I'm sure they still have their fan base, you know, that buys up those records.
Sure.
You know?
Is there anything that doesn't work on the record for you, Dewey?
I mean, the production, in my opinion, while it works, I wish it was a little better. Like sometimes I feel like it's a little raw or rough at times. You got to remember hearing Bob Rock's Motley 94, which in my opinion sounded incredible. Going from that to this was a bit of it kind of fell off a bit. So I wish the production was better. But I still think I'm not holding that. I still love the album to death. It just was a change of sound for sure, going from Bob Rock to this. But I don't know. No, I really don't have any. I love it. I mean, out of the two records, I think it's their strongest. Comparing this to Blue Room, I do love Blue Room a lot, but I still think this is the better record of the two. And no, really don't have any negatives for me. I wanted to say Tangerine might be, I don't know if you guys would agree, but I think it might be one of the catchiest songs on the record, at least in the top 2 or 3. It starts out with this like raging guitar solo.
Yep.
And it just like kicks in, like it's a spiral of like riffs, and it just comes in hard. And the chorus is just so, I mean, if there was ever to be a song that would catch, I thought that may have been it, but I don't think it was. That's
I thought the same thing. It was hey, if I can only play one song from this album to explain it to somebody, it's that song. I think it's the most seamless marriage of all the different things we talked about, where it really feels like, okay, this gelled, and it rocks, cool guitar stuff, hooky, and that mix of like dark and light that we talked about is really well balanced. So I agree. That's a good track.
Yeah, and that's another highlight on their live record that came out the next year, because that's the same story. When they released their live record, Metal Edge did an article on it, Union's releasing, I think it was Metal Edge, and I think Kiss had a fan magazine. I think those are the only two publications that ever covered anything on Union in the 90s. Like, unless you were reading these things, you had no idea this band even existed. Because their shows, I think 50 people went to their shows. I mean, it was like one of those things where if you knew about it, you knew about it, but not everybody did. But Metal Edge, I remember doing an article about them releasing a live record, and ironically enough, Deco is going to be announcing a pre-sale for that in the next couple weeks. So for anybody listening, if they're a fan of this record and they want to hear some of it live, check out their Facebook, because I'm sure it'll be announced really soon. But Tangerine fucking kills live. I mean, it's great. It's one of the best parts of the live record, next to October Morning Wind. So I could definitely see that as being one of their, one of the highlights of seeing them live. I never got to see them live, unfortunately. I didn't go see them. Back, they played Detroit. There was a venue up there called the now it's escaping my mind. It was a really dirty venue I went to in the early 2000s. I wanted to ask you if you guys were at this venue, because you would have remembered it. If you give me a second, I will look up the venue. But they played this venue in '98, and I was not able to go for some reason. It may have been work related or school related. But I never got to see them live. But from what I've heard from friends, they were a great live band. Let's see.
While you look that up,
yeah,
I want to share this little tidbit here. So this album, like you just got, was actually released on vinyl by this tiny label back in '98. So because it was released by a tiny label, obviously they're rare. Mm-hmm. Not always rare things are valuable, though. Let me explain. This album on Discogs sold for $12 in 2016. If you were to try to buy it today, that same in near mint for $12. There is one available for sale today, and it's $450.
You're talking about the first press of the first Union album?
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yep.
Motley 94 has gone up and up and up in value as well. I mean, it was in the $100 range like 10 years ago, and then in the past 5 years, it shot up 200, 300, 400, 500 plus now.
Well, there's only been 5 sales recorded of this record on Discogs, and the first one was $25, then $12, then $14.99, then $44.99, and then the last one sold for $200. So someone's jacked it up. That's some serious inflation right there, to go from 200 3 years ago to $450 for a 1998 album.
I know they're hard to find. I remember hearing about it when I started collecting vinyl, 10 or 12 years ago, but never thought to pick it up. I'm glad that they've been talking about these reissues for a long time. I follow Bruce on Facebook. Do you guys follow Bruce by any chance? He posts a lot of great stuff on social media.
No.
He's very interactive with fans. He'll reply to people. He'll kind of keep people on what's going on. He plays in Grand Funk now. That's like his gig.
Yeah.
But he still caters to the Kiss fans, because he always does a lot of retrospective posts. He just did one for Revenge a couple months ago that was really cool. He actually put a whole video together. But he posts about Union quite a bit, and he'll talk about the recording sessions, and he'll talk about the records. And he's been telling people for at least 5 years that they were getting these reissues ready. And I guess they finally found Deco to do it, because I don't think they were able to find anybody until they got in touch with this Deco Entertainment, which I had never heard of. So it all worked out. But I'm glad that they're finally out there.
I follow him, I think on Twitter. I stay pretty up to date with what he's doing, and he has a pretty great Kiss cover band that does some of the Kiss conventions. I think Brent Fitz plays drums in that band.
Yeah, I know that John has showed up at a couple, and they've done some Union stuff. I think they just did one in Indy either right before COVID or maybe last year. They did one in Indy. I've never been to a Kiss convention. I'm not that big of a Kiss fan to do that. But from what I've seen on YouTube, they're pretty awesome when John shows up.
I've only ever seen him on YouTube, but the band is super tight and goes back to Union.
And I think Bruce's wife even sings with him. I've seen her get up on stage and sing with him. Like, they'll do Kiss songs. I think they did. I can't remember what they did. One of the songs from the Unplugged record, and she was singing the lead on it. And by the way, I found the name of the venue. It was called Harpo's. Did you guys ever go to Harpo's?
In what city?
Detroit.
Maybe. I know that name. That name sounds very familiar.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Really, really, really bad neighborhood. Like literally, you get out of your car and you're like, I don't want to get shot walking to the show. Like just really, really bad neighborhood. Ironically, my first show at Harpo's was Vince Neil solo in 2002. But Union did play there a couple times in the late 90s, and I just couldn't make it. But one of the worst places to see a show. I mean, just horrible sound, really, really bad neighborhood. If anybody's listening from Detroit, they know exactly what I'm referring to, and I think it's still there. I know Sebastian Bach played there a couple years ago when he did the 30th for the self-titled Skid Row record. I remember seeing it pop up, and I was like, "Harpo's is still there? Like, who goes to Harpo's?"
I'm surprised which bars. So there's one in Indianapolis called the Melody Inn. That if you had asked me if it would survive 30 years or whatever it is, I would say no way, and it's still there. And
these are like the
bands still play it.
cockroach clubs that just never go away.
Even Bernie's couldn't survive here in Columbus.
Yeah,
it eventually got obliterated. Hey, let's get into our overall ratings for this record. We will share the results from our Patreon poll at the end. But Jay, where are you at with this record? Is it a worthy album? Is it a better EP or a decent single?
It's grown on me. I was at, I think the first couple listens, I was at more of an EP, but I've worked my way to an album as I spent more time with it. I like everything except for Pain Behind Your Eyes. It's okay. Let It Flow's okay. Empty Soul's okay. And Robin's Song is not good. So I think that puts me at like 8 tracks, which is and the ones I don't love, I think musically are very, very interesting and a lot of fun. There's just not sort of all there in terms of vocally and the hook, but I'm gonna wear the album. Where'd you land, Tim?
I'm like you. It took me like a number of spins and to really get into it, and then also listening with headphones and cranking it helped. Like making this a loud rock record really helped me enjoy it. I'm with you in that I would dump Pain Behind the Eyes, Empty Soul, and Robin's Song. I think you had one or two other ones, but I mean that's a 8 or 9 song album, and I would be happy with that. I know there was some bonus material on the vinyl reissue, so maybe something could fill in from there. But yeah, I definitely think this is a worthy album, and people should check it out. Dewey?
Yeah, obviously I would have it at a worthy album. I'm a little surprised you guys don't like Pain Behind Your Eyes. I remember that being one of my early favorites when I first heard it. It was a lot of the quiet loud that was really big in the 90s. I think that's probably why I loved it so much when I first heard it, because it's got that Collective Soul December riff that somebody said, which is kind of funny now that I'm never going to not hear that now.
Yeah, that's once you hear it, it's like, oh,
once you hear that, and then you imagine Gene Simmons singing the chorus, you'll never hear the song again.
Yeah. But I remember really liking that early on. I mean, as the years go on, I still don't skip it. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites on the album, but I remember liking that early on. But yeah, definitely a worthy record. I'm really excited to check out the B-side material. There's a song that I think it's called For You, I think.
Yeah. It was on the Japanese
You,
issue of this.
So For You is actually sung by Bruce. And it's on YouTube, and I actually just listened to it tonight because I was like, well, maybe I should listen to that just in case it happens to come up. So tonight was the first time I heard For You, and it's a really cool track. I really liked it a lot with Bruce singing. So I'm really glad that they put that on in the bonus content because it's great. So yeah, I loved it. So it's definitely a worthy record for me. I wish this band lasted longer than they did. They formed in 97, but they didn't start playing until 98, and then they were done by like 01. I want to say 01 was the last year they toured for the Blue Room, and then they were done. And I think it was mainly because of, I mean, how long can you go when there's no one coming to your shows and no one's buying the records, you know? I mean, I get it.
Especially because they're all pros. Like
Right.
it's not like a bunch of young guys who are just starting out and like scrappy and like we're gonna do it till we make it. Like these are all pros who are doing a project together, and if it's not going to work out, it's not going to work out.
Well, and they're all, at least Fitz and Bruce Kulick have got paying gigs they can then go to that, gonna make a lot more steady income than trying to make this work.
I think John joined Rat shortly after this, if I recall. He played guitar in Rat for a number of years on tour, but all these guys found gigs with the bigger established artists in the in the scene, like Alice Cooper, obviously Slash,
right,
Rat. So it just kind of makes sense when you got to pay the bills. Like I completely get it. And John Corabi, I'm not sure if you guys know much about his life or what happened to him after the Motley Crue days ended, but he was definitely kind of hurting for money a bit. So I'm not sure if he blew it all when he was in the band, or if I know he lost a lot in a divorce around that time, I think in the 90s, but the guy was really, really hurting for money. So, I can kind of see wanting to wrap this up if it wasn't going anywhere, and if it wasn't being profitable for them as a band. So,
right.
But in my opinion, I mean, I think it's some of the best stuff John's done. I love the Scream album he did. That would be another great one that we can talk about someday. Have you guys heard the Scream record that he was a part of? It came out in 91.
I have not.
I've gone back and listened to it. I remember when it came out, getting a little buzz but that's some time with it.
That's another one that would be a good one to look at. Maybe next year I can pick that one or something, but
it would
maybe not. I probably want to stay off the
trifecta.
Yeah, maybe I want to stay off the Corabi thing. I try to think of something different. I did Collective Soul last year. I'm like, well, what's different than I'll go to John Corabi. This actually came up a couple times years ago in polls. So either other people suggested it, I didn't, or maybe you guys put it in there, but it's come up in polls and it's never won, which is always pissed me off.
My guess is Scott Witt suggested it because he said it's a great album.
Maybe.
But I might be wrong.
It was at least 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. I remember the album cover coming up because I was like, are those bats? Like, what's going on there?
One of these days, you guys are going to run out of records to say, would you like to see this reviewed? Because there's only so many records that came out in one decade.
Oh, no.
You're going to
no idea.
We thought the same thing 10 years ago, and here we are.
We're stuck.
You're like, oh, we don't have any more albums that we can post about. What are we going to do?
We have so many albums. We're now voting every week.
Oh, my God.
We could probably have a daily vote, and we could probably have a daily podcast.
Yeah, I know that you guys always have your year mapped out based on the roundtables and the recommendeds and the. Yeah, I mean, how many do you actually get to pick yourselves per year? Like 2 or 3?
One, if there's a
weird scheduling hiccup
issue.
Yeah,
but we'll pivot. We did that 2 weeks ago. We did Dishwalla.
Yeah.
That's the first one we picked in years, right, Tim?
Yeah, we haven't had a pick in a couple years. Because we're just so packed with the roundtables, with the poll episodes, and then with our patrons picking, we haven't been able to do our own picks.
In fact, it was a bit of like deer in headlights. We're like, well, we could pick a record, and it was like, oh God,
we both kind of like froze for a minute. Like, how do we pick a record?
We actually ended up turning it into a vote. I was like, well, why don't you give me 3 and I'll pick 3, and then I'll just throw them up on Discord, and we'll have everybody pick today.
Neither of us wanted the responsibility, actually. We're like, no, it's too demanding.
I still don't know, and this is another one that I've always wanted. I still don't know how the first Oleander record has ever come up, because that was a huge rock record. I wouldn't say huge, because it had 2 moderately successful singles, but it was pretty loved in the late 90s, and it's still loved, and that's always been one that I think I'm going to choose, but I always say, no, I'm not going to do that this year. Literally for the past 5 years, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that this year. But I'm a little surprised that one hasn't come up yet in any polls, or there hasn't been any conversation of Oleander at all on any post at all, which is kind of. Are you guys familiar with Oleander?
I remember them.
them. For some reason, I get them mixed up with Econoline Crush, and I'm sure they're not even the same band or even sound the same. But
no, I'm pretty sure they're not the same band.
I mean, they're not in the same genre.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah, that's one of those that I've never seen ever brought up, and it just blows me away because it's one of my favorite albums from 1998. I think it was 98, or was it 99? One of those years.
Well, don't show your cards on your next pick.
Yeah, I know. But that's the thing that's been in my head, and then I always think, oh, I want to do this one more, or I want to do this one more. And the funny thing is about my review last year, which was Collective Soul's Discipline Breakdown, a year later, the band decided to do this whole full-blown reissue deluxe treatment. They released this amazing double CD with an entire live show from 1997, which for somebody who loved that record as much as me is like a gold mine, because there's very little stuff from that tour available. Digitally remastered it, put out a red vinyl on Record Store Day this year. I mean, they went all out for that record, which is really surprising to me, because as we discussed last year, that's, you know, that album, even though it was big at the time, they still only play one song from it live. That's it. It's kind of like forgotten about, in my opinion, to the band. So it kind of blew me away that they did all that for that record. So I was really happy when that came out a couple weeks ago. So, which was neat to see.
I saw that when I was out doing my record store day shopping.
Oh yeah, you saw that on the shelf?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think there was too many people buying it except me and maybe 3 other people. But,
I had a very limited budget, and I was really just going for the Prince record, the Gold Experience, because that was not, you could not get that on vinyl. You still can't. I mean,
yeah,
it's impossible. It was only a CD release, I think, in the 90s.
Oh wow, I don't know too much about Prince, but that's cool.
Let's give our results from Patreon for our poll on this record. 56% went worthy album, 33% better EP, and 11% went decent single. So a champion, it's not a runaway, but the most of the folks went worthy album or better EP. So I would say that that's a overwhelmingly positive response to this release that most people did not know based on their comments. They were coming into this blind, as I was. So got some converts there who are ready to join the union. Jay, did you steal that from them? Is that what happened here? I'll mute your microphone, sir.
He's still muted. You're still muted.
Still talking, and he's still muted. He can't unmute him.
My eyes are burning.
Oh,
I had to take a break here.
I got it.
He's chopping onions.
Stop, you can't be cutting onions now.
Sorry, I got a attack of pollen here. Give me a minute.
All right. Well, we got to thank Dewey.
I will say this: my streak so far of however many records we've reviewed have all been worthy albums. So I just want to let you know, still riding that streak pretty strong. So yeah,
hopefully somebody's compiling that info so we can see. We could create a rating system. Maybe we could start doing like this record gets 5 Deweys.
Sometimes I hear you guys review suggestions, and sometimes you tear down stuff. Those are always the best episodes to listen to, because the guest is always really, really quiet, like why
did I do this?
Yeah, those are always fun to listen to.
We do not do it with any ill intent.
No, not at all. It's good that you're honest, for sure. I mean, I never thought about the drumming performance on this record, to be honest with you, because I guess you're right, because it's nothing incredible, but it's not bad. It's just there. But I never once thought about it. I guess that would be why it never stood out to me.
Well, that's why we're here, Dewey.
Yeah,
exactly.
The minutia.
The great things about this record were John and Bruce combined, and that's what makes it great. So for anybody that loved John Corabi and Motley, or even the Daisies, and that maybe they haven't heard Union or the Scream, I highly recommend listening to this. And yeah, Bruce sounds terrific too. So glad we could talk about it today.
Yes. Well, if you listening out there would like to be like Dewey and suggest an album that you think is worthy of us checking out, you can do that a couple different ways. Number one, you can join us at Patreon. Join our special union, our gang of union members who help us pick records, who chat in our Discord about all kinds of stuff.
You guys tell me about the Discord. I've never signed up for it. Steven's been trying to get me on there for like 2 years.
It's a message board. I mean,
is it a mobile app? I've never been.
Yeah, you can use it on your phone, or you can use it on a desktop, and it's basically like it's a message board where it's private. Only the people who are patrons hang out there. So it's all music talk every day, all day, about all kinds of stuff.
Other stuff.
Other stuff.
people our age talk about.
I remember
stuff.
hearing you guys say that there was a big Our Lady Peace discussion, and I felt like really left out because I love that band. At least I used to love that
There's a
band.
whole Our Lady Peace channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so that's like it's basically like a message board, but it's broken into little individual message boards. So there's like an Our Lady Peace mini message board, and there's a Bands from Ohio mini message board.
You mean in the Dig Me Out channel?
Yes.
So Tim and I will
Really?
just like notice like, hey, there's a huge thread. Everybody talking about Our Lady Peace. Let's make an Our Lady Peace channel.
Huh.
So then
that's
we
There's a
interesting.
failure channel. There's
No shit.
Yeah,
Why the hell am I
Kelly's
not
in
in
it.
What are you doing?
Kelly
Oh.
Scott's a member of our failure channel. Get in there.
Oh,
and,
that's crazy. I didn't know that.
give him a hard time.
Maybe I should sign up for it. It's just one
for
of those
some reason
apps.
we like to give Kelly a hard time for things out of his control.
Does he actually like talk and stuff and say stuff on there?
Every once, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
they're on tour now, so he's busy. But every once in a while he would pop in and say something.
Yeah, for anybody listening, we were talking about failure for like 15 minutes before we started recording. So this is just coming back to that.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, that's really cool to hear that he's a part of that. That's
Yeah,
neat.
so please, yes, join us at the Union or at the Discord, because that's where the chat happens. And if you're unfamiliar folks out there listening with Discord, it's a message board. It's simple.
But it's nice. It's private. We keep it polite, nice. There's no,
it's
like,
kind. There's no flaming.
trolling,
There's no trolling
everybody's cool.
or bullying. We don't put up with any of that. And we don't have to worry about it because everybody's cool.
I initially thought, for some reason, it was like an AIM chat room, like old school AIM.
Oh, you thought like a live
all day
chat?
long? Yeah, like all day long. It just
me and Jay
scrolls.
just monitoring like
and
50
then
grown men all day as they chat.
And then I would check it 6 hours later, and I know I missed something important that I would have to spend all night scrolling looking for this.
Oh no!
So that's probably why I never signed up for it.
There's some of that. I mean, some of the channels are pretty active.
Yeah, if there's an active channel, you will have to scroll back because I mean, there's a lot, but some of them are getting a couple posts a week. It's not like a back and forth dialogue every day.
What was the last great like thread in the Discord that we can tell listeners about that they need to sign up and read it? Like, what was the last great? Can you think of one that you really enjoyed that? Because now I'm kind of looking forward to going on there and seeing.
Well, there's one on Rich Waterman sent us articles on Union. There's,
okay, cool.
Yep. Your Dailies
So that relates to this.
Of reviews and the Sleaze Rocks review. And he gave us a homework assignment to read before this.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But we also have non-music stuff. Like there's a gardening channel because some of us are into gardening, and there's a workout channel because some people are into exercise. There's a beer and liquor channel. There's a food channel.
There's the Now Watching, so we can figure out what shows to watch.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. I will definitely get on there. I'm at that age. I'm 41 now, a little bit younger than you guys, but I'm at that age where I really don't want to add more apps to my phone unless I really need them, type thing.
Well, the nice thing about this one is, you might delete some apps after you add this.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
because you'd be like, yeah, you might find, I don't want to say for sure, but you might find like, hey, I like talking to these folks about music more than I like spending time doom scrolling on Facebook or Twitter.
Yeah.
So
yes.
But just go to on Patreon, go to your benefits tab, and there's a link that will give you an invite.
Cool. Awesome.
I need to wrap us up here. So I'm going to say the box newsletter you can sign up for at digmeoutpodcast.com. Comes to you every week, an email via electronic mail with new releases of 80s and 90s relevant music, movies, television, books, and 2 reviews of recent new releases. It's also where you go to suggest an album. You get by going to the suggest an album page, drop it in the form. It goes into our now weekly polls that turn into a monthly showdown. And that's where our patrons get to vote. And then last but not least, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave some feedback, preferably nice feedback, on this podcast. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.